Hey, Don here. So I'm trying to brush up on my Israeli history, and as I'm going through making some notes, um, I thought I would make this will be a part one, and this is just a quickie, uh, and hopefully there'll be a part two, which there should be if there is a part one. But here's part one, just to help you brush up on some of your Israeli history as I try to brush up on it at the same time. So, November 2nd, 1917, you have the Balfour Declaration by the British. And this was, the Balfour Declaration was to create the homeland, THE. It was called the national homeland for the Jews, and it was later changed to a national homeland as they started to renege. But of course, the British had the land of Palestine. They were in charge of it, and through the Balfour Declaration, they were going to pass off that land to the Jewish people. And this land included all of Palestine. There was no West Bank or anything like that. It was all the land of Palestine, and that included Jordan, or what was called Transjordan. Transjordan was not one administrative entity before 1922 with Churchill's White Paper. But with Churchill's White Paper, he created Transjordan, that massive landmass. Now, just get out a map and look at the small sliver of land given to the Jews, and then look at this massive chunk of land called Transjordan. Do you see how lopsided that is? If Churchill was going to, now Churchill shouldn't have given any land to the Arabs, but if he was going to do it, he should have given the smaller piece to the Arabs and given Transjordan to the Jews. Give them, the larger piece of land. But of course, he should have given Palestine and Transjordan to the Jews, because that was all a part of their the landmass that belonged to them. So Transjordan, so-called, was 2/3 to 3/4. You can look at it on a map and decide whether you think it's closer to 3/4 or 2/3. But it's basically 3/4 of the British land mandate, the mandate that the Jews were supposed to get. 3/4 of it, or 2/3, if you want to say 2/3, was stolen from the Jews before they were able to actually move in. July 1922, Winston Churchill's quote-unquote White Paper is signed. And the British made, this White Paper is where the British made a partition in the Palestine Mandate, or Balfour Declaration, by separating the territory east of the Jordan River and renaming it Transjordan and giving it to Emir Abdullah, Emir Abdullah, to rule. Churchill said that he created Transjordan with a stroke of his pen. And, Churchill, being a cigar-sucking, fat druid, I think first thing in the morning, he always had basically a jigger of whiskey. He had to have a full breakfast in bed, smoked his stogie in bed, and he had to have, basically that kind of diet all day long. He's just a pig. But he did that and then bragged about creating Transjordan with the stroke of his pen. And what he did with the stroke of his pen, the British give him these accolades that, he saved Britain from the German aggression, and if it wasn't for Churchill, bum 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 bum. And the fools don't realize that Churchill sunk the British Empire with the stroke of his pen. All of Hitler's bombs and his rockets and everything that Hitler tried to do to destroy Britain wasn't anything in comparison to what Churchill did. And all Churchill had to do was use the stroke of his pen to do it. Greatest enemy of Britain probably ever. Much greater than Hitler. The League of Nations, wouldn't you guess, the League of Nations agreed to this division. Britain had been the constant enemy. Their history with the Jews is not much better than the Germans. The Germans always get the crap end of the stick, and the Germans, hated the Jews and they're anti-Semites and all this and that. Well, you know what? Britain wasn't far behind. And maybe I'll have a chance to give you some information on the British concentration camps that they set up for the Jews. But Britain had been the constant enemy and persecutor of the Israeli Jews. You see, Jews lived in Palestine along with the Arabs. They had already been in there, and they were there during the British occupation of Palestine. And they were the constant persecutor. And they would allow the Arabs to bully and murder the Jews oftentimes. They'd look the other direction. They'd look the other way. And they were the main hindrance of Jews getting to Palestine. When the Jews were trying to escape the Holocaust and trying to get to Palestine, Britain was the main hindrance, and that's where those concentration camps, the British ones, came in, hindering them from getting there. And up to that time, the British Empire held sway over 1/5 of the world's population up to 1922. They had a total land area of 1/4 of the earth. That's where you get the saying, the sun never sets on the British Empire, and Britain rules the waves and all that. But March 27th, 1921, Churchill, feeling the need to placate Abdullah, the Arab Emir, who was on his way to make trouble for the French, was given, at the influence of Lawrence of Arabia, another big Hollywood hero, Transjordan, severing it from Palestine. In 1947, British lost India. See, now Britain had to reap what it sowed thanks to Churchill. And in 1947, Britain lost India, called, quote, the jewel in the crown of England. Churchill said that India made the difference between England being a first-rate or third-rate power. They are now a fifth-rate power. May 14th, 1948, the British mandate was over. And May 15th, 1948, midnight Tel Aviv time, the Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, announced a Jewish state called Israel. Now, let me back up for a second. I want to also include that Hong Kong was transferred to China in 1997. So Britain lost that. By the end of World War II, Britain was left bankrupt because of the war. Malaysia, together with Singapore and Borneo, became independent from Britain. In 1950, or by 1957, they became independent by 1957, and Kenya by 1960. The Sudan in 1954, Canada 1926, New Zealand 1947, Iraq 1932, Fiji 1970. Just notes I've made. They lost all that land, and the sun set on the British Empire. And like I said, May 14th, 1948, the British mandate over Palestine was over. They packed their bags and took off. And May 15th, 1948, midnight Tel Aviv time, the Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, announced a Jewish state called Israel. 11 minutes later, now I want you to remember that, 11 minutes later at 6:11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, President Harry Truman announced the United States recognizes the provisional government as the de facto authority of the new state of Israel. Notice those 11s there? Do you remember 9/11? So 11 minutes later at 6:11, the United States was blessed and received blessings because it immediately recognized and backed up the state of Israel. When George W. Bush, I have my notes just right here. I think I'm going to get into this right now. But when George Bush decided that he wanted land for peace, the day that he was going to go sign that land for peace deal, screwing over the Jews, and he was going to make that deal on 9/11 with, what's that jerk's name? Yasser Arafat. Yes, sir, I am fat. The day he was going to go do that, the planes went into the Twin Towers. The Twin Towers forming what? An 11? An 11. You know, some of you that think that it was all some kind of hoax or some kind of thing where we had bombs in there and it was the CIA and blah, blah, blah. You're just not a very good student of history, and you don't know God. God had been preparing 9/11 for some time, knowing what our president would do. And he knew that the Twin Towers formed an 11 standing there. That 11 is the 11th hour. It's the 11th hour. And we were blessed when we blessed Israel 11 minutes after they announced their state at 6:11. And we had our Twin Towers knocked down on 9/11 when we decided to double cross them. No coincidences. The handwriting's on the wall. You can read it. May 16th, 1948. Page 1 of the Palestine Post reads, quote, "State of Israel is born." But May 15th, 1948, 5 out of 7 Arab countries attack Israel. I mean, we all remember, what was it, December 7th, 1941? America is attacked by the Japanese, and this war of aggression, and we got to defend ourselves, and, blah, blah, blah. And it's funny how when Israel, that we recognized as a proper country, and the world should have recognized, 5 out of 7 Arab countries attack Israel May 15th, 1948. And if it wasn't for the United States giving them a hand at that point, they'd have gone under if God would have allowed it. But nobody else stepped in. But that's how things began. You know, these Arabs acting like, oh, this aggressive Israel, and oh, they shouldn't be here, and we're just peaceful Muslims. There's nothing peaceful about a Muslim. And that Arab is that madman. His hand is against every man, and every man against him. And you had Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, who recently had to reap what they sowed when we went in there, and I don't know how many millions of them they got wiped out. Good. Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and Transjordan, the land that was stolen from them. Transjordan turned around and attacked Israel, even though they were living on stolen land. The land given to the Arabs by the British attacked them. And this was the War of Independence. So this is part one, and let's hope there's a part two.